Welcome to Driving with R, the podcast where we explore narcissism and its effects on society, humanity, and people like you and me. And how do you find meaning when meaning has been obliterated? You know, like what's post-scorched earth? You know, when the things that you valued and treasured are gone, are literally gone. And I think that a lot of us, maybe all of us in life, have to kind of grapple with this whole concept of, okay, so my life has taken this incredibly pivotal turn to where everything that I thought meant anything means nothing at all. And it's like, oh my God, you know, how do you live? Okay, so I was watching Deadpool 2. And at the very beginning of the movie, I don't know, I forget the name right now, but the main character obviously loses the love of his life, right? And so when that happens, or when that happened in the movie, it's almost like, well, you know, nothing else really matters. And he said something to that effect in the movie. And so, you know, what do you do after that? What do you do after that? You know, and so if you understand narcissism and you understand your place in that whole scenario, you know, where maybe you loved someone who didn't love you back, or perhaps maybe you were raised by a narcissist, and all the shit that's supposed to mean something means nothing. What do you do with that? And unfortunately, or fortunately, I think it's this. I think it's that you sit with the loss. And then in sitting with the loss, and maybe after sitting with the loss, you become resurrected in a way to life anew, life different, like a different existence, because suddenly you have to learn to feel gratitude for the fact that the sun came up in the morning. And suddenly you have to have gratitude for, you know, for flowers and for rain showers and just things that really didn't move you before. It's like, okay, well, I guess this is it. I guess this is the beauty now, because the beauty I thought existed apparently doesn't in the way that I thought. You know, there's still going to be love and beauty and things like that in your life probably, but the one thing that you thought mattered more than anything turned out to not matter at all to anyone but you. And you can't have a relationship with someone who can't value you. You can't have a partnership with someone who can't appreciate you. You know, it just isn't possible. And so, you know, what you have to do is learn to accept this change. It's like so many other changes in life. You have to learn to accept this change. And like I said, sit with it. Maybe even find a way to welcome it. And I don't even know how. I don't even know how that works, but just to be like, you know, it's going to happen anyway. All this stuff is going to happen anyway. And so we need to find a way to honor it and allow it and accept it. And that sounds impossible. But when you get yourself to a place where you have a calm stillness inside of you, it gets a little bit easier. And I think that's why being meditative is so important. Now, I say meditative because I don't necessarily believe that meditation specifically has to be performed in the way that it's traditionally performed. If you can spot a time in your life when you are being meditative, all you got to do is tap into that, you know, and memorize that state and try to bring it into your life. And maybe it's not as hard as you might think, because it isn't necessarily about emptying your mind. It is about not dwelling to some extent. It's about letting the thoughts go, you know, like understanding, kind of recognizing them as being, you know, thoughts and letting them go. And this applies especially to narcissism, because when you have been in a situation with a narcissist, some of the things that they say will kind of resonate and haunt and like keep coming back and stuff like that. And so this is really important in that respect too, because all those sweet things that person said aren't really true, in reality. And so you have to maybe receive them and release them. And I think one of the best ways of doing that is by when you recognize something happening in you that is starting to give you kind of an emotional flashback or something like that, or starting to make you sad, you need to recognize what that is. You need to recognize what's happening and intentionally take an inhale as you realize what's happening, and then exhale the emotion out and the memory out and release it at that point. It's so important that we learn to do this, because I don't know if I've said this recently. I know I've said it, I think on a recording or something recently, but it's like, if you don't learn to do this, you will probably die in your sorrow. There's so many things that you have to learn to do as a result of the trauma of being human, that if you don't learn to embrace newness and, a new way of thinking and living and believing and existing, if you don't do that, you'll just kind of die in your sorrow. And that would be okay if it were quick and easy, but it's not. That would be okay if it would happen suddenly and it was over, but that's not how that goes. Typically, dying of sorrow is kind of a slow death, unless you do something stupid and try to end it quickly. Because I think we all know that sometimes when you do something like that, it doesn't end, and it just is prolonged only on a worser level, on a more devastating level. And so there's no shortcut out of this. There's no easy way out of this. And so, maybe we should give our suffering a name, or, call it something where we can talk to it and, and kind of like understand it, or just acknowledge that sorrow. Because I think our souls are crying out to be heard about this pain. It's just really existential pain. It's not always necessarily related to narcissists or narcissism. It partly is just life. Because if it's not a narcissist, I'm telling you, it's going to be some other loss. And really hard to live with. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what's left out there? What is there left for me? If this love wasn't it, if this love was a joke, what is there? And that, I think, therein lies your quest, your quest for discovery and your self-exploration task and things like that, where you have to go, okay, how can I squeeze beauty and joy out of this life, out of this lemon I've been handed? How do I make a killer, I'm trying to think of the right word, gourmet lemonade out of this sorrow? The lemons of my life. And I feel like the fighters will do this, and I think that hopefully we're all fighters. Hopefully, we don't succumb, because again, succumbing to the sorrow isn't necessarily a shortcut out of it. Sometimes it prolongs it and makes it worse. And so it feels like there's no other way. So if you're kind of wondering what's left, it's time to lay down the old thoughts. It's even time to lay down that what's left thought, and it's time to move forward into discovery, And so I have discovered a lot of things. It's almost like I had kind of, forsaken beauty because I thought it was worship. I thought it was idol worship. And as it turns out, the good Lord shook me up and said, open your eyes, and I had to embrace kind of a different way of thinking and a different way of living. And that includes like intentionally raising my vibration, or seeking out things that I perceive as highly vibrational. Like, does this make me happy? Does this color resonate with me? Does it make me feel better? And so these kinds of things are the kinds of things that I'm starting to recognize and starting to pay attention to. Because I think that it's all a part of being whole, you know, is bringing all these pieces of yourself together and knowing who you are and standing in that. And I used to think that was not right. I used to think that was selfish and self-centered, but and as it turns out, as the journey of life goes on, it ends up being, for some of us, really necessary, you know, that we figure out exactly who we are and you know, work through the sorrow and look for the beauty after the destruction. You know, it's like when you see, or you can have this image of in your mind of like a forest fire and everything's destroyed except for blessed Mother Nature is now sprouting new greenery, and that's what we have to do. That's what we have to look for, is the little shoots of life that are going to grow back into a full forest eventually, you know, and cultivate that beautifulness and, you know, cultivate just anything lovely in your sphere that you can, you know, and just bask in it and be blessed by it and enjoy it. Yeah, I'm having one of those days where I'm like, oh, burdens, roughness, but you know, that's life. And so I will finish with this, as I always say, and a lot of us always say, do something good for yourself. Do something kind for yourself. Watch something funny. You know, watch something that lightens you up a little bit. And it's tricky trying to figure out who you are. It's tricky, you know, exploring these new frontiers, but I think it's necessary. And I don't know, you know, where we all end up, but I'm hoping that we all end up whole and healed and well and not living in sorrow, because that's a bad place to be. So I'm hoping that we all kind of move through and breathe out the sorrow and be alive to what's next for us. That is it. Have a wonderful everything, and I will talk to you next time.